in the mountains, the monkeys are just moving in a straight line through the trees, but you're basically like running up and down a mountain underneath them, trying to keep up with them. So it makes it really, really hard.
Well, we lost them for 100 years.
Well, we lost them for 100 years,
That makes
exactly.
sense.
And then, it gets really misty and cloudy, so they can be really hard to follow. But with the drone, it just flies over them and you can see their bodies, like their body heat just stand out really nicely. So we're testing out the thermal drone to see if it's a more efficient way and a more accurate way to get full counts of monkeys that are in an area. My name is Christopher Schmitt. I'm an associate professor of anthropology, biology, and women's gender and sexuality studies at Boston University, and I study monkeys.
So, you study extreme monkeys.
Yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
That's a good question. So the monkeys themselves are not necessarily that extreme, but they live in extreme environments that can actually kind of push their behavior, their physiology to extremes compared to other monkeys. So for example, I have two main study projects. So one is in Peru, where I study a monkey that lives way high up in the Andes. And so they live really high elevations up to about 2,400 to 2,800 meters above sea level. So that's like 9,000 feet, more or less.
Whoa.
Really, really high up. And I want to understand how they can survive at those high altitudes, what they've done to adapt to it physiologically, because there's really low oxygen, it's very cold. It's generally not really a place where you tend to find monkeys. So I really want to understand how they manage to live up there and thrive up there. And my other project in South Africa is studying a monkey called Vervet monkeys, and they live on the savanna, and every 10 to 20 years there's a really, really severe drought. And I want to understand how they adapt to survive during these times where there's very little water, very little food. In part, so I can better understand how humans have adapted to survive under those conditions.
So you talk about how you study monkeys that live either really, really high up or they live in these really dry environments.
Yeah.
So why is it important to study monkeys in these extreme environments, and what can we learn from them?
Yeah, so I'm a biological anthropologist. It means that, I use the methods of biology and biological research, but I use them to better understand our own evolutionary history as humans. With biological anthropology, we're trying to figure out how humans evolved to be the way that we are. As it turns out, for biological questions, a lot of times humans are not very good for studying questions that we have about humans. I know it sounds strange.
Well, why is that?
So, for example, my work with vervet monkeys, I'm trying to understand the development of metabolic disorders. And, obviously, there are NIH researchers, biomedical doctors who are studying obesity and metabolic disorders in humans. But it's really hard to study from a long-term developmental perspective because, as humans, we live really long. It takes us a long time to reach adulthood. Non-human primates, monkeys, actually make really good models for understanding a lot of these patterns that we know or we think might have occurred in humans, but that we don't really have the ability to study because of how long-lived we are and how difficult it can be to kind of intervene in studies. So, for example, when you try to study human diet, like people lie about what they eat, like, we eat things and don't tell people, we aren't very good at controlling what we eat, and obviously if somebody came in from outside and told me what to eat, I'd be like, no thanks, I'm gonna eat what I want to eat. But with vervet monkeys, we've been able to really make tight links between metabolic traits like obesity, type 2 diabetes, and certain variants in their genome. So we've sequenced all the letters of their genetic code, and we've been able to figure out which areas of that genetic code, which letters actually associate with things like growing up to become obese or developing type 2 diabetes. And so we have some hypotheses about how that might have evolved, so how there might be natural conditions in our own history that might have led to us being predisposed to developing type 2 diabetes or becoming obese when we eat a lot of fatty food, for example. But again, it's hard to test in humans. So with these monkeys in captivity, now that we've got these links between certain genetic variants, different letters that might associate with certain metabolic traits, we can go out to the wild and study it in these wild monkeys and understand what ecological conditions might have led to that predisposition.
Okay.
So the main kind of question I'm asking in the vervets is testing a hypothesis called the thrifty genotype hypothesis. And this is the idea that in our evolutionary history as humans, we've faced drought periodically and famine periodically. And it might be possible that individuals who were able to more quickly lay down body fat or, eat more food and then store that in their bodies for when a drought or a famine would come later might have been better able to survive. And that might have led to all humans eventually, over a long period of time, having these thrifty genotypes or genetics that predisposed them to laying down body fat quickly.
Okay.
And the idea is that in these wild contexts, you wouldn't normally become obese or develop metabolic disorder because there wouldn't usually be that much food.
Yeah.
And indeed, with the vervet monkeys in the wild, we don't usually see them become heavier.
Okay.
Although in cities, sometimes when they have access to human garbage, they'll eat a lot and they'll become a little chunky, right?
Okay.
But in captivity, where they have all the food that they could possibly want to eat, then we do actually see them become very heavy and develop all of these metabolic disorders like we see with humans. And so, my research with the vervet monkeys is essentially trying to test out this thrifty genotype hypothesis, this idea that when these monkeys face famine, when they face these droughts every 20 to 30 years, whether or not certain parts of their genome essentially turn on. And the idea is that those parts that help them survive the drought are going to be the parts that also in captivity predispose them to becoming obese.
Okay. So it's almost like a survival of the fittest. If you were able to store all of this fat during a drought, those were the monkeys that would survive, and maybe that's what's become more common among monkey populations.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's a great term, survival of the fittest, because we don't actually think of becoming obese as being fit, right?
Yeah.
But evolutionarily speaking, when we talk about fitness, we're talking about who survives and reproduces the best, right?
Yeah.
And when we think about these biologies, these physiologies that predispose us to becoming obese and having metabolic disorders in cities, right? We don't think of that as healthy. But, in conditions like drought, when we don't have a lot of food, absolutely it can help you survive. And in that context, it is really fit.
So then tell me more about the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys. What can we learn from them?
I mean, so I started studying yellow-tailed woolly monkeys because of YouTube.
Okay, tell me about that.
Sounds really strange. But I was doing my PhD research on lowland woolly monkeys, which are very closely related.
Okay.
And yellow-tailed woolly monkeys are really interesting. We thought they were extinct for over 100 years. Nobody who is a scientist had seen one in a long time. And in the 1970s, this researcher, Russ Mittermeier, was talking to community members in Peru, and they mentioned something that sounded like this monkey. And so he went up into the mountains and saw them again in 1974 for the first time in 100 years.
No way.
And we realized that they weren't extinct. I was really interested in them as kind of like this, iconic monkey that looked really cool. I know, exactly.
Yeah.
An enigma, nobody'd really studied them. And so one day I was on YouTube looking for a video for a course that I was teaching. And I just, looked up woolly monkey in YouTube, and there was a video of a yellow-tailed woolly monkey, and I was like, oh my God, that's it, it's alive, it's there. And I left a comment on the video, and I was just like, I was about to leave for my field research in Ecuador. And I wrote, I'm going to be in Ecuador. I study lowland woolly monkeys. I would love to come and see these yellow-tailed woolly monkeys.
So you were a yellow-tailed woolly monkey fangirl at this point.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
100%. I was obsessed. And very luckily, he wrote back, and he was like, oh, yeah, we're looking for somebody to study these monkeys. Why don't you come down?
Oh, my God.
And so I went, and this is in 2007, 2008. Mm-hmm. And so I flew down there, and it was just amazing. I mean, first of all, a cloud forest is gorgeous. It's so beautiful. And, after, years of doing lowland rainforest research where it's hot and humid and you're getting stung by everything and the trees are all pointy and everything feels like it's trying to kill you, to be up in the mountains and it's cold and it's cloudy, you're above the clouds, and the forest is because it's high elevation, the forest is really kind of short.
Okay.
So it's if you go really high, it's called elfin forest, and so it's the canopy is right above your head.
Yeah.
And the monkeys are right there. So it was just really, really magical. And it's really wonderful. The yellow-tailed woolly monkey work is unique because they're critically endangered.
Okay.
So the only way we can really work with them is to, go where they are. We
Yeah.
can't dart them. We can't trap them. We just have to follow them onto people's land, like in the mountains. And so we work really closely with local community conservation initiatives, including one called Oso Dorado. It's like a woman-founded and woman-run conservation collective in a small village in the mountains.
That's awesome.
Where they just were like, they realized that these monkeys are really beautiful. We need to protect them. And so we work really closely with them. In part to do our research, but our research is really kind of an effort to help make their lives easier with what they want to understand and protect about the monkeys.
Okay.
So, for example, with the National Geographic Society, we got a grant to use a thermal drone. So it's basically a drone that has a camera that can look at temperature differences.
Okay.
Because, again, it's very cold, and so the monkeys, their body heat really stands out in the drone footage. So the thermal drone is in part to do more efficient survey work for the monkeys, because they're very, very hard to follow. They're, like in the mountains, the monkeys are just moving in a straight line through the trees, but you're basically like running up and down a mountain underneath them, trying to keep up with them.
Yeah.
So it makes it really, really hard.
Well, we lost them for 100 years.
Well, we lost them for 100 years,
That makes
exactly.
sense.
And then, it gets really misty and cloudy, so they can be really hard to follow. But with the drone, it just flies over them, and you can see their bodies, like their body heat just stand out really nicely. So we're testing out the thermal drone to see if it's a more efficient way and a more accurate way to get full counts of monkeys that are in an area.
Okay.
And we're hoping this will help the local communities keep better track of how many monkeys there are and where the monkeys go. And that's, in addition to the other research we're doing, like understanding what they eat, trying to figure out what the conditions they need in order to survive so that we can better preserve them.
So I'm curious about sort of the translatability of the yellow-tailed woolly monkey research to humans. So you've been learning about their adaptations at this extremely high elevation. What application does that have for us?
Well, it's a good question. The way that we think about it is we think about it as an example of what we call convergent evolution. When you have animals with similar physiologies in similar environments, they might adapt in the same way to better survive in those environments. So, for example, we know that there are humans that live at really high elevations too, even higher than what we see in the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys. In the Himalayas, in the Ethiopian highlands, in the Andes. And we know from human biologists and people who study the human genome that these different human populations have actually evolved different ways of getting at the same mechanisms for surviving at high elevations.
Okay.
So, for example, people who are well adapted to high elevations tend to have greater lung capacity because at higher elevations, there's lower oxygen available in the atmosphere. And they also tend to, they have genetic variants that allow them to create more red blood cells so that they can circulate oxygen more efficiently. And so we're really interested in understanding whether or not these monkeys have converged on similar adaptations as humans.
Okay.
Not only basic evolutionary principles, like how do animals and primates in particular adapt to high elevations, but also to better understand what that means for their conservation.
Any specific adaptations so far that you've found with this convergent evolution?
I mean, it's still pretty early.
It's early, okay.
We only really started this new round of research in like 2022, 2023.
Oh, wow.
So it's
Okay.
like very,
So
very
very
recent. Yeah. So what we're doing right now is we're working on using genetic technologies to understand what the monkeys eat. So basically, again, with the yellow-tailed woolly monkeys, we can't touch them, we can't trap them.
Right.
So if we want to understand what's happening physiologically inside their bodies, the one thing that we can rely on is poop. So basically, we can't touch them, but like if they poop, we can pick up their poop, and that's fine. So we've collected a lot of poop. From the poop, we get a lot of information. So we are trying to sequence their entire genome, so all of the letters that make up their DNA. And then additionally, we have 2 projects right now that are more kind of poop focused in a way, in that we're trying to figure out what's in their poop. So one of those projects is looking at their microbiome, which is basically trying to understand all of the organisms that live inside of their poop as a way of understanding the organisms that live inside of their gut. So this includes my student Reese Houghton-Summers is looking at the virome, so trying to understand all of the viruses that live inside their gut. And my student Sophia Weaver is trying to figure out all of the bacteria that live inside the gut. And I'm really interested in that because the bacteria actually produce a lot of molecules that we don't produce ourselves that we need in order to survive and thrive, especially at high elevations where, food can be a relatively lower quality just because of the lower oxygen and it's colder. So we really want to understand whether or not the bacteria that are inside their gut are helping them to survive in this relatively kind of food-poor landscape. We don't yet know how food poor it is, though, because we don't know what they eat. And that's another study that we're trying to do. We're using something called DNA metabarcoding.
Oh.
I know, it sounds fancy. All it means is that we are basically sequencing, basically trying to figure out what plants and insects they're eating by sequencing little bits of DNA that have been digested by the monkeys and are being pooped out by them.
Okay.
And this has been done in other species where you actually can know what they were eating, like the day or two before the poop, because you can find the DNA of the plants and animals they were eating in that poop.
Okay. Could you do this with humans?
Yeah, no, 100%. Yes, I think people have done this with humans.
Okay, but only for plants. No one would know if I ate a bag of Cheez-Its because of my poop.
That's a really good question, actually. I mean, we would be able to tell, what plant or animal materials were in the Cheez-Its. We would be able to find the DNA from that. But yeah, I don't know. The other things, we would probably have to do another procedure.
Okay.
But no, you totally could find that out, I think, through various other technologies.
Okay, so I just want to lay this out. So you're in this cloud rainforest, running around, just collecting monkey poop.
Yeah.
And then what happens next once you have that monkey poop?
Right, yeah. Once we have the poop, so we put the poop in a little tube.
Okay.
And the tube has a chemical in it called a buffer that preserves the DNA, which is of course what we're going to be working with. Then the buffer also keeps it fresh, so we don't have to necessarily freeze it, but we take it to a freezer anyway. We pop it in the freezer. For a while, we were popping it in my friend Sam's freezer, and then his wife got really angry. She's like, "This is for food. We're not putting monkey poop in here, please." And so we bought a separate freezer, which is what we should do. We should keep the monkey poop separate from other things. It stays there until we're ready to actually do the genetic work. When we do the genetic work, we pick up the poop. We fly it down to a town called Puerto Maldonado. We get on a boat with the poop, and we're on that boat for about 8 hours, going down the Madre de Dios River into the Amazon.
Okay.
And then we get to a field station called Los Amigos Biological Station. At Los Amigos Biological Station, my friends and colleagues, Mrinalini Watsa, who's at the San Diego Zoo, and her partner, Gideon Erkenswick, they have developed an in situ genomics lab in the middle of the Amazon. I mean, it's amazing. I have a genetics lab at Boston University, and the lab down there is as good, if not better, than the one I have here. It's incredible. And they developed it so that people in Peru could have access to this. There's this phenomenon that some people call parachute science, where researchers from the global north, like the US or Europe, fly to Latin America, fly to Africa, and they collect data and they bring it back. And the people who live there never see it. They aren't participating in it.
Yeah.
And so Mrinalini was like, well, this is ridiculous. We need to increase this capacity. So she developed this wildlife conservation lab at Los Amigos. And it's really incredible because we can just take these samples and work with Peruvian scientists at this lab in the middle of the rainforest, which is incredible, in order to sequence these data.
Wow.
Yeah, and then from there it's all computational. So we bring the data back, we analyze it on computers in order to identify, what the DNA can tell us.
So there's a lot that you're learning from the poop. One of these being what bacteria, what viruses could be in the monkey's gut.
Yeah.
Is the idea that you're going to then compare the microbiome of monkeys living at extremely high altitudes with microbiomes of people living at really high altitudes?
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing we'd like to do.
Okay.
I mean, so yeah, we've got microbiome data on these monkeys. It would be amazing to find out if there are particular families of bacteria that help them to create the kinds of molecules that they need in order to survive at those high elevations. Again, might be a great example of convergent evolution in humans and in these monkeys to find that certain kinds of bacteria are helping them, survive on low-quality foods. And, there may be other pathways that we find in the bacteria. There's really cool programs that allow you to see what physiological processes are implicated in the various kinds of bacteria you find in the gut.
Okay.
So you can find out these bacteria actually help you process sugars, and these bacteria break down fats. And so it would be really cool to see if there are kinds of pathways that are in common in humans and these monkeys living at high elevations. But those pathways might not even be with the same bacteria. There could be different bacteria providing the same service in our gut, which I think that's the coolest thing about evolution, actually, is I don't expect the pathways to be identical, even in different human populations. We actually find that, the ways that humans in the Himalayas and humans in the Ethiopian highlands have adapted to high elevations are completely genetically different pathways. And so I don't expect it to be identical in the monkeys. But I mean, that's what's really cool about it is they could have come up with a completely unique way to survive at high elevations that can tell us a little bit more about, kind of the amazing variety that evolution can provide.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are some of the tools that you use for DNA fingerprinting these monkeys?
Yeah, so that is actually a really, really cool part of my research. It's where I feel like I'm genuinely in the future. We actually use a technology called third-generation sequencing.
Okay.
It's just so cool. The way that it works is the sequencer has a membrane, which is just like a thin film of organic substance, right? And embedded in that membrane are little bioengineered pores. And a pore is just a gateway through the membrane, right? So what the pore does is the pore will latch onto a DNA molecule, and it will start to pull the DNA molecule through the pore. Now, there's electrical current that passes through the membrane. And as each letter of the DNA passes through that membrane, the molecular structure of that letter interrupts the electrical flow in a very particular way. And so what that means is that when an A goes through, there's a very particular electrical interruption. When a C goes through, there's a different electrical interruption. When a T, slightly different again. And in that way, the sequencer can actually read the pattern of the interruption and call what letter is passing through. So you're basically directly reading the letters in the genome through that pore.
So it's real-time DNA sequencing,
Yes,
essentially.
real-time DNA sequencing. And it reads about 400 to 450 of those every second.
Wow.
It's incredible. And so the more incredible part about this is that the size of the sequencer is literally like the size of a jump drive. It's maybe 6 inches long and an inch wide. It is amazing. So it's portable. And so this sequencer, we use it in my lab here at BU to develop protocols. But then when we go to South Africa and go to Peru, we actually just go to labs that also have those little portable sequencers in them. And we are able to sequence on site. So at Los Amigos in Peru, where we do all of this in situ lab work, it's the Minayan is the name of the sequencer. And the same thing in South Africa with my local collaborator. She also uses a Minayan to do her sequencing. So it's just really, really cool because it's made it so much more accessible to be able to do genomic sequencing in the field because you can just literally bring your sequencer along with you and it works perfectly well. It's incredible.
So I guess that begs the question then, if you're, studying these monkey populations and thinking about, their evolution and how that could relate to our evolution, just how similar are we to monkeys?
Oh, we're very, very similar.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like genetically, all humans are like 99.9% identical.
Okay.
Like all the letters in our genomes are almost exactly the same. Chimps are like 98.7% identical. Like gorillas, something like 98.5. I mean, a banana is like 50% genetically identical to us. So, when you think about it that way, it's not super impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, we have like last common ancestors with other non-human primates that are much more recent than with other species. And what that means is that a lot of our physiological systems are very, very similar, which means that we can really learn a lot about our own biology by studying other monkeys and other non-human primates. I mean, a lot of biomedical research is done on mice at the beginning, and mice are so much more distantly related to us. Like 75 million years ago is our last common ancestor with mice. Our last common ancestor with vervet monkeys is maybe 23 million years ago, so much more similar. And of course, in captivity, we've done the kind of research that would be necessary to make sure that those equivalencies are there. So,
Okay.
We've done work looking at what happens when vervet monkeys eat a lot of fat. And, just like with humans, they get type 2 diabetes and they get unhealthy. And yeah, like the physiological systems seem to be identical. The genetic work I did in captivity suggests that all of the genes that are associated with obesity in the vervets are the same genes that are associated with obesity and metabolic disorder in us.
Okay.
So yeah, I really do think that they make good model systems for understanding these evolutionary patterns in humans.
Okay. You study these monkeys at extreme environments, really high altitudes, droughts, and thinking about our changing planet, what implications do you see for the adaptations that these monkeys have that could apply to us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, obviously, human-induced climate change is happening. We see weather patterns changing. The drought that I'm studying in South Africa with the vervet monkeys was the most intense drought that's ever been recorded in South Africa.
Wow.
We expect these extremes to happen more and more frequently because of global climate change. And so some of the work that me and my students are doing is trying to find out how resilient the monkeys might be. So I have a student, Max Dipple, who was studying a heat shock protein in the vervet monkeys. And he found that they have adaptations in a heat shock protein that might actually buffer them from the bad effects of really, really hot weather.
What is a heat shock protein?
So a heat shock protein is a protein that essentially latches on to other proteins in your body and makes sure that when your body gets overheated, that those other proteins don't break apart.
Okay.
So it basically keeps your body stable when you overheat.
Okay.
And keeps everything functioning. And the heat shock protein that Max was studying in particular preserved sperm function. So it's like a very, very specific fitness affecting trait where it just makes sure that sperm remain functional under very, very high heat conditions.
Okay. So this heat shock protein, when it gets really, really hot, it's making sure that sperm is not
breaking apart. Basically, yes.
Okay.
He noticed evolution in that heat shock protein that maybe is helping to preserve reproductive ability in these monkeys. I think what we'll see is that we might see more of that, more kind of evidence of evolution or selection for traits that help animals better survive under whatever extreme environments they're hitting, right? Because, the thing about global climate change is that certain areas are becoming much hotter and getting more drought, but other areas are also getting colder, right? It really depends on where on the globe you are. So I think what we'll see is that a lot of animals will adapt. The big question is whether they can adapt quickly enough. So with evolution, it's great, like these variants that help protect animals from these extremes can, over generational time, become more common, given that, the animals that have them reproduce more. The problem is that global climate change is happening so quickly that animals might not be able to take that time to adapt. And this is where you start to see extinctions.
I kind of want to take a step back here and
please.
ask, how did you even get involved in studying these extreme monkeys in the first place?
Well, I So I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, going to public schools.
So not a lot of monkeys in Wisconsin.
Not a lot of monkeys, no. I mean, we had a great zoo, and I
Okay.
loved the zoo. But I was really lucky in that when I was in high school, we had an alumnus, so somebody who had graduated from my high school previously, who made a lot of money in biotech and donated some scholarships to the school through an organization called the Earthwatch Institute. And they essentially, at that time at least, were funding high school students to go and be field assistants on other researchers' field projects.
Okay.
So I won a scholarship to go to Argentina between my junior and senior year of high school and follow black and gold howler monkeys around for a month collecting their poop. So I've been collecting poop for a long time. And it was just, it was really amazing. Like, it was my first time out of the country. It was only my second time on a plane. It was working with this like international group of really enthusiastic scholars and researchers and volunteers. And yeah, I mean, I was like just following monkeys around in the Chaco in Argentina for a month and watching them fight and have sex and poop and collecting the poop and like collecting their pee. And I mean, it was, it was really, really incredible. And so when I graduated from high school, like my family didn't have a lot of money, so like I couldn't afford to go to like a college out of state. So I ended up going to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I was really lucky in that there were a couple of really great primatologists there. Karen Stryer was my undergrad advisor, and she's just an amazing primatologist. And yeah, I just like really kind of fell in love with it. I actually was an English literature major.
Oh, okay.
So I know I loved books also. And when I graduated from college, I wasn't sure yet what I wanted to do, so I won another scholarship to work with the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, which is a really great evolutionary anthropology institute in Germany. And they essentially hired me to follow white-faced capuchin monkeys around in Costa Rica for a year. And in that job, I was doing very traditional primatology work. I was basically like waking up, following the monkeys from sunrise to sunset, recording all of their behaviors, and we were especially focused on juvenile behavioral development. So like we're following these like cute little baby monkeys, writing down everything that they did, not collecting poop for this job, so that was a little break from the poop collection. And it just was like amazing. It was like watching a soap opera. Like we got to know the monkeys really, really well. Like we saw all of this amazing, amazing behavior. And I just really fell in love with it. So so I applied for PhD programs in biological anthropology, because that's where we do primatology work for the most part in the U.S. And yeah, like got into New York University, continued studying juvenile development, this time in woolly monkeys and spider monkeys at NYU. And yeah, just like kept going from there.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When you are out in the field, looking at monkeys, doing their thing, what do you think the monkeys think about you?
Oh, I mean, sometimes you know what they think about you. Like, the monkeys, they don't necessarily hide what they're thinking about you. It depends on the species. Some monkeys are not very bothered by humans. Usually before we start studying monkeys, we go through a process called habituation, where we just get the monkeys used to us being around so that they aren't alarming at us every time they see us. And the idea is that once you've done habituation, the monkeys behave as if you're not there, right? But in reality, like, the monkeys always know that we're there.
Okay.
And, just like we can tell differences in other animals, right? Like, if you have a dog, you can tell your dog from other dogs, even if other dogs are the same breed, right? With the monkeys, like, we can tell them all apart by face eventually. Like, we can learn them just like we learn human faces, right? And by the end of my time with the capuchins, for example, like, I could tell who a monkey was based on like how they sauntered, even if they weren't facing me. I'd be like, oh, that's him. So you get to know them really well. And they also, of course, get to know you really well.
Do you name the monkeys?
Yeah, so we do name them. There was like some debate about whether or not people should be naming their study subjects, because it encourages what we call anthropomorphizing. So, it is fun to watch the monkeys and be like, ooh, like Tattle's being terrible today, right? It's fun to like gossip about them.
Yeah.
But, we have to maintain some objectivity when we're
Right.
actually trying to understand their behavior. But the naming of them, in order to figure out who's a particular individual and how they're behaving and how they're interacting with other individuals uniquely, we do need to kind of give them a unique
Right.
designation. So we do name them. And again, like, we do know that they know who we are because they react to us differently, right? So, for example, with the capuchins, we hired a guy, Mike, who was very tall, very burly, and the monkeys did not like that. So, like,
Monkeys
whenever
did not like Mike.
yeah, no, they did not like Mike. And whenever Mike would come, they wouldn't attack Mike. They would attack the person who brought Mike because they were scared of Mike. So they would attack us instead. So, and then, there were other monkeys that like had particular relationships with each of us. So, some monkeys would, not like other people, and so they'd like be really mean to them. Other monkeys were really interested in other people, so they'd follow them around. So yeah, we definitely they do know who we are, and sometimes we try to work with that in our research. So I have a colleague; all of the people on her team wear bright blue hats, and the bright blue hats the monkeys learn are the people who study them. And so if they see a person without a bright blue hat, they know maybe I shouldn't go near that person.
Okay.
So they're only used to people with bright blue hats.
Okay.
And that's a way to protect them. Because if the monkeys are just like, oh, all humans are okay, and a human comes by that doesn't like the monkeys and maybe wants to hurt the monkeys, then that's a problem. So there are ways to kind of work with that recognition that the monkeys have and how we habituate them that can help to protect them as well.
Okay. What have been the most challenging parts of doing this work and this research?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. So I'm gay, and because of that, sometimes fieldwork can be a little more difficult.
Okay.
Insofar as, sometimes we work in areas where people aren't used to openly gay people being around, or people, maybe the local government is not on board with gay rights. When I was working in the Gambia briefly, the president at that time was calling on the radio for people to kill all the gays.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, like it can be difficult if parts of your identity don't necessarily mesh well with kind of local politics or local culture.
Yeah.
And this, it's not just being gay. Like it could also be if you're a woman. It could be if you were black in certain areas. There are parts of our identity that may make that field work a little harder than it might be for others. Some of those challenges have been rooted in those difficulties. And to be clear, like, I also have had many really great experiences in the field being gay. Like, it's not universal. Just like in the United States, you can go to certain parts of the country, even certain parts of Boston, right, where it's, safer or more pleasant to be gay or not, right? But yeah, there have been some difficulties rooted in that. And then there are other difficulties, like it can be really hard work. Like I mentioned with the rainforest, there are a lot of things that can bite you. Like you can get a lot of diseases. I've had dengue fever. I've, been chased by a lion before. I've like fallen so many times. Thankfully, never broken anything. I one time was in the middle of the Amazon, nobody around for miles, and my boot got caught in the mud, and it was when I was stepping over a really spiky vine, and so I was just sinking, slowly descending onto the spiky vine. And so I pulled my leg over and thankfully did not get spiked, but then I was stuck in the mud and I was like, oh, am I gonna die here? So I mean there's events like that too that can be a little scary, but also afterwards they're fun to talk about. So yeah, I'd say the biggest difficulty in the field work I guess is it's not so much the animals. The animals are wonderful.
Yeah.
They can be a bit of a pain sometimes. You might not find the monkeys for a week or two, and that's really stressful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say one of the difficulties is kind of working in all of the kind of infrastructure that is required to make the research happen. So getting permits can be very difficult.
Yeah.
working with local people can be wonderful, and obviously, as I've already mentioned, it can have its own kinds of risks and rewards inherent to it. But obviously, like, I'm still doing it. So for me, like, the hard parts are worth it just because it's so amazing to be able to follow the monkeys around, and even more amazing, to be honest, to like analyze the data afterwards and see these patterns that are important to their evolutionary histories, and to understand what these patterns mean about us as humans. For me, that all makes it really worthwhile.
I wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience as a gay man in the field where people were not very accepting.
Yeah.
How do you even approach hearing someone say, kill all gay people? Like, what do you do?
Well, you stay closeted,
Yeah.
and that can be really hard. So, yeah, when you closet yourself in the field, it's interesting because it brings back all of those feelings of when you were closeted as a kid. No matter how long you've been living like out and proud as like a gay person. And so I have had to closet myself on and off for long periods of time in the field. Obviously in the Gambia, I stayed very deeply closeted. It was very, very difficult. Like my boyfriend was dumping me at the time, like long distance, and like I couldn't talk to anybody about it, and I couldn't even it was terrible. And it's interesting because even if you really love and accept that part of yourself, once you closet yourself, like all of those same thought patterns that you had as a kid just come back again. Like, oh, you know, I'm not a good person. Like, why do I have to like lie and hide this part of myself? Like, even if you understand and know that this is a good part of yourself, when you start to hide it, it just all becomes like this spiral of shame and hiding. So it's really, really terrible. After like a really long field period where I had to be closeted, I immediately had to go into therapy because I was like, nah, I'm dealing with all of these things again that I thought were okay.
Yeah.
And then of course, you know, it can be complicated because I mean, we should be like forming friendships and bonds with local folks. But of course, local folks are like, oh, are you married? Like, tell us about your wife. You know, what do you think about her? Isn't she hot? Like, all of these things are just part of the day-to-day of being in a community. And to have to lie about that also is shame-inducing and feels wrong, and it just feels like kind of unfair, right? Because, of course, my straight colleagues don't even think about it. They're just able to be there and be themselves and show pictures of their wife, and so in my career now, I'm very lucky in that I like don't have to be closeted. Like I've made it a point to work in places where I don't have to do that. It can be very difficult depending on, you know, where you're at in your life and how well you can handle closeting yourself and whether or not you can closet yourself to begin with, because of course some people are very readable as queer and don't have that luxury.
Right.
So. But I mean, again, I don't want to make it sound like this is something unique to working in Africa or working in Latin America. Some of the like most accepting field, I mean, obviously, like the field situations I'm in right now, I can be out and it's perfectly fine. And this is in Peru and South Africa, and there are parts of the U.S. where I would hesitate to be out, right?
Yeah.
So this isn't something that is like we're okay and they are not, right?
Absolutely,
This is more just like. You do have to kind of assess the local circumstance and figure out what's safest for you insofar as being able to get the work done and also maintain your own safety and sanity.
I'm curious if you've been, you know, thoughtful and intentional about making your lab and your science and your students feel as if it's a welcoming, inclusive space.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, students maybe think I'm too open. Like I come out in my classes, like. I make it a point to spotlight other queer scientists where they come up if they're relevant to what we're talking about. And in my lab, like we have a code of conduct that just stipulates like it's not acceptable to be homophobic, transphobic, racist, sexist, misogynistic, ableist, like all of these things, because I want to make sure that other people have an easier experience than I did. Like, I
Yeah.
definitely, when I was a student, ran into some issues with being out, both in classroom and field settings, and I would prefer my students not have to go through the same thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's just an extra load that makes the work harder. Like, if I'm thinking about my mannerisms and whether or not I look too femmy, or whether or not, oh, did I use the wrong pronoun? Like, are they going to understand that, like, I'm gay? Is that going to be a problem? If I'm worrying about that, I'm not thinking about the science.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that my students don't have to worry about that.
So I'm curious, what do you love about monkeys?
I really love that monkeys help me to see humans better, if that makes sense. I think in studying monkeys, I get a much better idea of kind of the basics about why humans behave in the way they do, why humans kind of function in the way that they do. And with monkeys in particular, I get to think through those concepts and ideas while also staring all day at something very, very cute. So it's kind of the best of all possible worlds in that respect.
Okay, I love it. Chris, thank you so much for coming in. I really enjoyed chatting with you today
Me
and
too.
loved hearing about these monkeys.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.